Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of the Missouri Ozarks. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time at which you're listening to this narration. We're interested to know in which places and at what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. In the autumn of 1867, the remote Thornhill estate in Stone County, Missouri, became the center of events that would challenge every rational explanation attempted by investigators over the subsequent 7 decades. What makes this case particularly disturbing is not merely the violence that occurred, but the systematic documentation of psychological deterioration that preceded it, and the inexplicable physical evidence that remained long after the principal actors had perished. The Thornhill property occupied approximately 1,800 acres in a limestone hollow, 32 miles southwest of Springfield, accessible only by a deteriorating wagon road that became impassable during the heavy rains of spring and autumn. The estate had been established in 1842 by Colonel Marcus Thornhill, a Virginia planter who had relocated westward with considerable wealth and 12 enslaved individuals. By the time of the Civil War, the Thornhill holdings had expanded to include 23 enslaved people working the tobacco fields and maintaining the sprawling manor house constructed of local limestone and imported hardwoods. The house itself stood 3 stories tall, an architectural anomaly in that wilderness region, featuring a prominent widow's walk and an extensive cellar that extended deep into the limestone bedrock beneath. Colonel Thornhill had died in 1861, just weeks before Missouri's tumultuous struggle to define its allegiance in the coming conflict. His son, Dr. Edmund Thornhill, inherited the estate at the age of 34. Edmund had been educated at the University of Pennsylvania, where he studied medicine with particular focus on the emerging field of psychiatry and the treatment of nervous disorders. His medical thesis, preserved in the university archives and reviewed by this researcher in 1934, concerned the hereditary transmission of mental afflictions and proposed controversial theories about bloodline contamination and the physical manifestation of psychological disturbance. Edmund returned to Missouri in 1859 with his wife Catherine and their 3 children, Margaret, age 8, Thomas, age 6, and infant Carolyn. The Civil War period proved chaotic for the Thornhill estate. Missouri's divided loyalties meant that both Union and Confederate forces moved through the region, requisitioning supplies and occasionally pressing men into service. According to the Springfield Republican, dated November 12, 1865, Dr. Thornhill maintained a studious neutrality, treating wounded soldiers from both armies when they appeared at his door. The newspaper account describes him as a man of science who considered himself above the political passions of the age, devoted instead to his medical research and the management of his agricultural holdings. What distinguished Dr. Thornhill's household from other Missouri estates was his extensive personal library, which by 1865 contained over 400 volumes, many of them medical texts imported from Europe. His collection included works on mesmerism, the treatment of hysteria, anatomical studies, and several rare manuscripts concerning folk medicine practices from various cultures. Neighbors who visited the estate remarked upon the doctor's peculiar nocturnal habits. He maintained a laboratory in the cellar where he conducted experiments involving the collection and preservation of biological specimens. In a diary entry dated March 3, 1866, written by Reverend Josiah McKenna of the Springfield Methodist Congregation, the Reverend notes his concern after visiting the Thornhill estate. Dr. Thornhill received me cordially enough, but I was troubled by the pallor of the household servants, particularly the young woman called Delphine. When I inquired about her health, the doctor assured me she was participating voluntarily in his medical studies concerning anemia and blood disorders. I cannot say why this explanation disturbed me so, but I left the estate with a sense of unease I have rarely experienced. Delphine was approximately 19 years old in 1866, the daughter of Sarah, one of the original enslaved individuals brought from Virginia by Colonel Thornhill. Despite the Emancipation Proclamation and Missouri's abolition of slavery in January 1865, the Thornhill household continued to operate much as it had before the war. Dr. Thornhill had offered wages to his former slaves, but given the isolation of the estate and the limited opportunities for African Americans in post-war Missouri, most remained in his employ. Delphine served as a personal attendant to Mrs. Catherine Thornhill and assisted with the care of the 3 children. Records indicate that Delphine was notably educated for an enslaved woman of that era. Colonel Thornhill, unlike many slaveholders, had permitted basic literacy instruction, and Dr. Thornhill had continued this unusual practice, apparently viewing the household servants as potential subjects for his research into the intellectual capacities of different races. In a letter dated June the 18th, 1866, written by Mrs. Catherine Thornhill to her sister in Philadelphia, preserved in the collections of the Missouri Historical Society, Catherine mentions Delphine with evident affection. She reads to the children each evening and has proven herself indispensable to the household. Edmund has taken particular interest in her education, providing her access to certain of his medical volumes. I confess I find this somewhat irregular, but Edmund insists that his research requires subjects with sufficient intelligence to articulate their experiences clearly. The first indication of disturbance at the Thornhill estate emerged in late August 1866. A traveling merchant named Silas Pemberton stopped at the property to sell household goods and later reported his observations to authorities in Springfield. According to the Springfield Republican, dated September 7, 1866, Pemberton stated that he found the atmosphere at the estate profoundly altered from his previous visit 6 months earlier. The servants moved with apparent fear, avoiding eye contact and speaking in whispers. Mrs. Thornhill appeared exhausted and troubled, though she conducted her business with him efficiently. Most disturbing to Pemberton was his brief glimpse of Delphine, who he described as having undergone a shocking physical transformation. He stated, "The young woman appeared wasted, as though consumed by some terrible illness. Her skin had taken on an unnatural pallor, almost luminescent in quality, and her eyes held a strange intensity that unsettled me greatly. When she moved past me in the hallway, I noticed marks upon her arms, regular punctures that suggested repeated medical procedures." Dr. Thornhill explained to Pemberton that he was conducting important research into blood diseases and that Delphine had volunteered as a subject, receiving compensation for her participation. He assured the merchant that all procedures were conducted with the utmost medical propriety and scientific rigor. Pemberton later told authorities that something in the doctor's manner troubled him more than the explanation itself. He described Dr. Thornhill as speaking with unusual animation, his eyes bright with what Pemberton characterized as an enthusiasm bordering on fanaticism. Through September and October of 1866, several other visitors to the estate reported similar concerns. A supply wagon driver named John Hastings told the county sheriff that he had heard strange sounds emanating from the Thornhill cellar during an evening delivery, rhythmic chanting in what sounded like multiple voices, accompanied by metallic clanging that might have been laboratory equipment, but struck him as having a ritualistic quality. When he mentioned the sounds to one of the field workers, an elderly man named Joseph, the worker's face had drained of color, and he had walked away without responding. More troubling still was the testimony of Miss Elizabeth Hargrove, a school teacher from Springfield who had been engaged to provide supplementary instruction to the Thornhill children. In a statement given to Sheriff Walter Brennan on November 3, 1866, preserved in the Stone County Courthouse records, Miss Hargrove described her increasing alarm during her weekly visits to the estate throughout October. The children, she reported, had become withdrawn and fearful. Young Margaret, age 9, had begun drawing disturbing images during her lessons, figures lying on tables with dark liquid flowing between them, cave openings that descended into blackness, and repeatedly a young woman with hollow eyes, surrounded by what Margaret described as the red flowers that only bloom at night. When Miss Hargrove had questioned Margaret gently about these drawings, the child had whispered, "Father says Delphine is helping us become strong. She gives her blood so we won't get sick like grandmother did." Miss Hargrove knew that Dr. Thornhill's mother had died in an asylum in Virginia in 1858, apparently suffering from hereditary madness that had afflicted multiple generations of the Thornhill line. When the teacher pressed for more information, Margaret had begun to cry and refused to speak further. Most alarming to Miss Hargrove was an incident that occurred on her final visit to the estate on October 28, 1866. She had arrived earlier than scheduled and had encountered Delphine ascending from the cellar. The young woman moved slowly, supporting herself against the wall, and when she noticed Miss Hargrove, she had simply stared at her, with an expression the teacher struggled to articulate. In her statement, Miss Hargrove wrote, "It was not hatred or fear or pain that I saw in her eyes, though perhaps all of those emotions were present. Rather, it was a quality of profound knowledge, as though she understood something terrible that I could not yet perceive. When I asked if she required assistance, she shook her head slowly and whispered words I shall never forget. 'Master stole my blood, but I am taking something of his in return.' Then she smiled, and I swear before God that her teeth appeared unnaturally sharp in that dim hallway." Miss Hargrove had immediately informed Mrs. Thornhill that she could no longer provide instruction to the children and departed the estate. Her report to Sheriff Brennan prompted the first official inquiry into the Thornhill household. The sheriff, accompanied by Dr. Marcus Reinhardt, the county medical examiner, visited the estate on November 10, 1866. Dr. Thornhill received them cordially and provided a comprehensive tour of his facilities, including the cellar laboratory. In his official report dated November 12, 1866, Sheriff Brennan described finding an extensive medical setup, including examination tables, glass vessels containing preserved specimens, detailed anatomical charts, and several locked cabinets containing what Dr. Thornhill described as experimental compounds. The doctor explained his research in confident terms, stating that he was investigating the possibility of preventing hereditary madness through controlled blood transfusion and the administration of certain mineral compounds derived from the limestone caves that honeycombed the region beneath his property. He had, he explained, been conducting careful experiments on willing subjects, documenting the effects of regular blood extraction and replacement with treated solutions. Dr. Reinhardt examined the medical equipment and documentation and found nothing explicitly objectionable from a scientific standpoint, though he later confided to Sheriff Brennan that the entire enterprise struck him as highly irregular and potentially dangerous. Dr. Thornhill produced signed consent documents from Delphine and 2 other household servants agreeing to participate in his medical research in exchange for additional compensation. The documents appeared legally sound, though Dr. Reinhardt noted that the true voluntariness of such agreements between a wealthy white employer and recently freed slaves in 1866, Missouri, was highly questionable. When the sheriff requested to interview Delphine privately, Dr. Thornhill agreed without hesitation. The young woman was brought to the parlor, and Sheriff Brennan noted in his report that she appeared physically weakened but mentally alert. When questioned about her participation in Dr. Thornhill's research, she responded in a steady voice that she had volunteered willingly and understood the medical procedures being conducted. She acknowledged that the treatments left her temporarily exhausted, but insisted she was compensated fairly and treated well. When pressed about the marks on her arms and the concerns raised by visitors to the estate, she simply stated, "The doctor believes he can cure the madness in his blood. I am helping him try." Sheriff Brennan found no legal grounds for intervention. The practice of medical experimentation on willing subjects was not regulated by Missouri law in 1866, and Dr. Thornhill's possession of a medical degree from a respected university provided him considerable latitude. The sheriff departed with a warning that he would be monitoring the situation closely and expected to receive regular reports on the health of all household members. What makes this case particularly disturbing is the detailed documentation that continued through the winter of 1866 into the spring of 1867. Dr. Thornhill maintained meticulous research journals, several volumes of which were later recovered and analyzed. These journals, preserved in the archives of the Missouri State Medical Association, reveal a progressive descent into obsession that crossed the boundary between scientific inquiry and something far darker. In entries dated throughout December 1866, Dr. Thornhill recorded his observations of what he termed remarkable adaptations occurring in his research subjects. He noted that Delphine, after repeated blood extractions and transfusions using his treated solutions, had begun to exhibit unusual resilience. Despite the removal of what he calculated as nearly 40% of her blood volume over 3 months, she remained conscious and functional. More significantly, he observed changes in her sensory capabilities. She reported heightened sensitivity to light, preferring to work in dimly lit spaces. Her hearing had become acute to the point where she claimed to detect conversations occurring in distant parts of the house. Most intriguingly to the doctor, she had developed an apparent immunity to certain sedative compounds he administered, metabolizing them far more rapidly than physiologically normal. Dr. Thornhill interpreted these changes as evidence supporting his theory that human blood could be chemically modified to produce enhanced physical and mental characteristics. He theorized that the mineral-rich limestone water from the caves beneath his property, combined with certain herbal compounds he had researched in folk medicine texts, could fundamentally alter blood composition and potentially eliminate hereditary weaknesses. His journal entries reveal growing excitement about the implications for treating his own family's history of mental illness. In an entry dated January 15, 1867, Dr. Thornhill wrote, "I have begun small-scale transfusions with my own children, using Delphine's treated blood. The process must be gradual to avoid rejection, but I am convinced this represents the path to purging the Thornhill curse from future generations." Catherine objects strenuously, but she does not understand the scientific principles at work. "I have documented improvements in the children's vitality and resistance to illness. Thomas has not suffered a single cold this winter, whereas previously he was frequently afflicted." What Dr. Thornhill apparently failed to recognize or chose to ignore was that Delphine's physical changes were accompanied by profound psychological transformation. A diary kept by Mrs. Catherine Thornhill, discovered in a trunk in the estate's attic in 1923 and subsequently donated to the Missouri Historical Society, provides a contrasting perspective on events during this period. In increasingly desperate entries, Catherine documented her horror at what her husband was doing. From her diary entry dated February 3rd of 1867, "I can no longer remain silent about Edmund's activities. What began as medical research has become a terrible corruption. Delphine moves through the house like a wraith, her eyes hollow, yet burning with some inner fire. She no longer sleeps in the servants' quarters, but remains in the cellar for days at a time. When she emerges, the children flock to her with a devotion that terrifies me. They speak of dreams she has shown them, visions of tunnels beneath the earth where blood flows like underground streams." Edmund dismisses my concerns, insisting everything proceeds according to scientific principle, but I have seen him looking at Delphine with an expression that mingles triumph and fear in equal measure. The situation reached a critical point in early March 1867. On March 8th, 2 field workers from the estate arrived in Springfield in a state of considerable distress, reporting to authorities that something terrible had occurred. According to the Springfield Republican dated March 10, 1867, the workers, brothers named Jacob and Samuel Freeman, stated that Delphine had collapsed during dinner service 2 nights earlier, falling to the floor and experiencing violent convulsions. When Dr. Thornhill attempted to revive her, she had opened her eyes and spoken in a voice they described as resonating with unnatural depth and multiplicity, as though many voices spoke through her simultaneously. The workers reported that Delphine had looked directly at Dr. Thornhill and whispered, "Master stole my blood, but I have been drinking from the deep places. The caves remember what was done here long ago, and they are teaching me their language." She had then risen to her feet with disturbing fluidity and walked to the cellar entrance, descending into the darkness below. Dr. Thornhill had forbidden anyone from following her, posting himself at the cellar door with a pistol and wild look in his eyes. Sheriff Brennan organized an immediate response. On the morning of March 9, 1867, he arrived at the Thornhill estate with a deputy, Dr. Reinhardt, and Reverend McKenna. What they found upon entering the house would become the subject of investigation, speculation, and documented testimony for decades to follow. The main floor of the house appeared superficially normal, though unsettling details were immediately apparent. The furniture had been rearranged to create clear pathways leading to the cellar entrance. Symbols had been chalked on several walls, geometric patterns that Dr. Reinhardt later identified as mixing alchemical notation with what might have been corrupted medical diagrams or perhaps representations of cave systems. The house was absolutely silent. No servants appeared. No sounds emanated from the upper floors where the family bedrooms were located. Sheriff Brennan called out, announcing their official presence. The silence persisted for nearly a full minute before they heard movement from above. Footsteps descended the main staircase, slow and deliberate. Mrs. Catherine Thornhill appeared, and the visitors were shocked by her condition. In his official report, Sheriff Brennan wrote, "Mrs. Thornhill appeared to have aged 10 years in the 4 months since I last saw her. Her hair had become streaked with gray, her face deeply lined, and her eyes held the haunted quality of one who has witnessed horrors beyond articulation. She moved as though in a trance, speaking in a monotone that suggested profound exhaustion or perhaps shock." Catherine informed them that Dr. Thornhill was in the cellar with Delphine and would not permit anyone to enter. The children were in their rooms, she said, and must not be disturbed as they were undergoing a critical phase of treatment. When pressed about the nature of this treatment, Catherine began to weep silently, tears streaming down her face without accompanying sound, and would say nothing further. Sheriff Brennan made the decision to breach the cellar entrance. Drawing his weapon and instructing the others to remain behind, he descended the stone steps into the subterranean chambers beneath the house. His subsequent testimony, recorded in multiple depositions and court proceedings, remained consistent across all tellings, though he confessed that he struggled to find adequate words to describe what he encountered. The cellar had been dramatically altered from his previous inspection. The medical equipment remained, but it had been supplemented with additional apparatus whose purpose was not immediately clear. Copper tubes ran along the walls, connected to glass vessels filled with dark liquid. The limestone walls themselves had been carved with more of the strange symbols, cut deep enough to expose the lighter stone beneath. The entire space was illuminated by dozens of candles arranged in precise geometric patterns on the floor. In the center of the main cellar chamber, Dr. Edmund Thornhill knelt before an examination table. Upon the table lay Delphine, though whether she was alive or dead was not immediately apparent to the sheriff. Her body appeared drained of color, alabaster white in the candlelight, and absolutely motionless. Dr. Thornhill was bent over her, his hands pressed against her chest, speaking in a low, urgent voice that Sheriff Brennan described as having a pleading quality. When the sheriff demanded that Dr. Thornhill step away and identify himself, the doctor raised his head slowly. Sheriff Brennan later testified that he had never seen such an expression on a human face, a mixture of ecstasy, terror, and something he could only describe as religious transcendence. Dr. Thornhill's clothing was stained with blood, though whose blood was unclear. His eyes were wide and unblinking, reflecting the candlelight with an almost metallic sheen. "She showed me, Doctor," Thornhill whispered. "She showed me what lives in the deep places, what has always lived in the limestone bones beneath Missouri. The caves know, Sheriff. They remember when this was the floor of an ancient sea, when things that were not yet human made their homes in the darkness. Delphine found the way down past my laboratory, into chambers I never knew existed. And she drank from the pools there, the water that flows through stone for 10,000 years, water that carries memory and hunger and terrible old wisdom. Sheriff Brennan ordered Dr. Thornhill to move away from the table. The doctor complied, rising to his feet with mechanical precision. As he stepped aside, Delphine's eyes opened. Multiple witnesses in the cellar would later provide remarkably consistent descriptions of this moment. Her eyes had changed color, the warm brown recorded in earlier descriptions now replaced with a pale gray that seemed to capture and reflect the candlelight with unusual intensity. When she sat up, her movements possessed a liquid quality that several witnesses described as reptilian or insectoid, as though her joints functioned differently than human anatomy should permit. Delphine turned her gaze to Dr. Thornhill and spoke. Her voice, according to every testimony, had changed in quality, resonating with harmonics that seemed to come from multiple sources simultaneously. The words she spoke were documented with near-perfect consistency across all witness statements. "Master stole my blood, seeking to purify his cursed line. But I have stolen something greater from him. I have drunk from the deep places, and the deep places have drunk from me. Now I carry what the caves remember, and I am teaching it to his children, drop by drop, night after night. They dream the dreams the limestone dreams. They know what waits in the dark." Dr. Reinhardt, who had followed the sheriff into the cellar despite instructions to remain above, attempted to approach Delphine from a medical perspective. In his report dated March 15, 1867, he wrote, "I observed the young woman with my professional attention and could document several physiological anomalies that defied medical explanation. Her pulse, when I managed to briefly examine her wrist, was profoundly slow, perhaps 20 beats per minute, yet she remained conscious and animated. Her skin temperature registered significantly below normal. Most disturbing were her eyes, which exhibited an unusual reflective quality in low light, similar to certain nocturnal animals. When I attempted to examine her pupil's response to light, she pulled away and smiled at me with an expression of such profound and alien intelligence that I confess my professional composure faltered entirely. Sheriff Brennan made the decision to remove everyone from the cellar and secure the premises pending further investigation. As he attempted to guide Delphine toward the stairs, she moved with sudden, shocking violence, breaking free from his grip with strength that seemed impossible for her diminished frame. She retreated toward the far wall of the cellar, where a natural opening in the limestone led into darkness beyond the reach of the candlelight. "The children are already changing," she said, her voice echoing strangely in the stone chamber. "The master wanted to cure his madness by stealing my blood. But madness was never the problem. The problem is what the Thornhills have always seen in their dreams, what drives them to seek answers in blood and darkness, that hunger is inherited, passed from generation to generation, and now it has found its perfect vessel. I have merely accelerated what was always going to happen." Before anyone could respond, Delphine stepped backward into the cave opening and was gone, swallowed by the absolute darkness of the natural caverns beneath the Thornhill estate. Sheriff Brennan produced a lantern and attempted to follow, but the passage descended at a steep angle, the limestone slick with moisture, and extended into depths that his light could not penetrate. He called out repeatedly, but received no response save the echo of his own voice distorted by the cave acoustics. The sheriff's immediate priority shifted to the children and Mrs. Thornhill. When they ascended to the main floor, they found Catherine collapsed in the parlor, breathing but unresponsive. The children's rooms on the second floor were found locked from within. When the doors were forced open, the scene that greeted the investigators became one of the most extensively documented aspects of this entire case. The 3 Thornhill children, Margaret aged 9, Thomas aged 7, and Caroline aged 2, were discovered lying in their beds, apparently asleep. Their physical condition was alarming. All 3 exhibited the same unnatural pallor observed in Delphine, their skin taking on an alabaster quality that seemed to emanate a faint luminescence in the dimly lit rooms. Their breathing was synchronized and unnaturally slow. When Dr. Reinhardt attempted to wake them, they did not respond to touch, voice, or even painful stimuli. More disturbing still were the drawings that covered every surface of Margaret's room. Using charcoal, chalk, and what appeared to be blood, she had created intricate images of cave systems extending deep beneath the earth, branching passages that connected to chambers filled with symbols and figures that were disturbingly non-human in proportion. Repeated throughout these drawings was the image of a young woman with hollow eyes, standing at the threshold between the drawn world and empty space, as though she existed at the boundary between one reality and another. Dr. Reinhardt conducted thorough examinations of all 3 children and documented his findings in a report that was subsequently sealed by the Missouri State Medical Board, but was made available to researchers in 1937. He noted that all 3 children had fresh puncture wounds on their arms and necks, consistent with repeated injections or extractions. When he collected blood samples for microscopic analysis, he observed unusual characteristics in the cellular structure that he struggled to explain with his understanding of physiology. The blood appeared darker than normal, more viscous, and contained what he described as crystalline formations of unknown composition, possibly mineral deposits introduced through the experimental treatments. Dr. Thornhill was taken into custody and transported to Springfield for questioning. During the wagon ride, according to Deputy Marshal Thomas Wickham's testimony preserved in the Stone County criminal records, the doctor oscillated between periods of manic discourse about his scientific discoveries and intervals of catatonic silence. At one point, he grabbed the deputy's arm and said urgently, "You must understand that I was trying to save them. The Thornhill madness has claimed 3 generations. My grandmother died screaming about the things that watched her from the corners of her room. My mother spent her final years in restraints, speaking in languages no one recognized. I saw the same signs beginning in Margaret. I had to find a way to purify the bloodline, to extract the curse. Delphine was supposed to be the filter, you see. Her blood, treated with the cave minerals, would absorb the contamination. But something went wrong. Or perhaps something went exactly as it was meant to go, following a design far older than my understanding." Dr. Thornhill was held for psychiatric evaluation at the State Asylum in Fulton. During his 3 weeks of observation before his trial, he provided detailed testimony about his research and the events leading to the catastrophe. Dr. Leonard Ashford, the asylum's chief physician, documented these interviews in a case study published in the American Journal of Psychiatry in 1871. Dr. Thornhill described discovering natural cave passages beneath his cellar while excavating to expand his laboratory. He had explored these caves and found pools of mineral-rich water that local legend associated with healing properties. The caves extended for miles beneath the Ozark Plateau, connecting to other cave systems throughout the region. According to Dr. Thornhill's account, Delphine had begun experiencing vivid dreams after the transfusion experiments commenced. She described dreams of swimming through dark water, of voices that spoke without words, of memories that belonged to things that had never been human. Dr. Thornhill interpreted these as hallucinations caused by the mineral compounds in her blood. He now believed they were something else entirely, a form of communication from something that existed in the deepest reaches of the cave systems, something that had been waiting for a suitable conduit to reach the surface world. "I thought I was conducting rational scientific research," Dr. Thornhill told Dr. Ashford in an interview recorded on March 28, 1867. "I believed I understood what I was doing, that I could control the variables and predict the outcomes. But Delphine was not merely a passive subject. She was changing in ways I documented but failed to comprehend. And when she began entering the caves alone at night, drinking from the deep pools, something began changing her from within. She would return before dawn, and I would draw her blood for my experiments, never realizing that what I was extracting was no longer entirely human. When I transfused that blood into my children, believing I was immunizing them against hereditary madness, I was actually introducing something far stranger into their bodies." The trial of Dr. Edmund Thornhill commenced on May 6, 1867, in the Stone County Courthouse. He was charged with assault, unlawful imprisonment, and conducting unauthorized medical experiments on both enslaved persons and his own children. The proceedings attracted considerable attention, with the Springfield Republican providing daily coverage in newspapers as far away as St. Louis reporting on the case. The prosecution presented testimony from numerous witnesses, including Miss Hargrove, the Freeman brothers, Sheriff Brennan, and Dr. Reinhardt. The defense, led by attorney Harrison Caldwell of Springfield, argued that Dr. Thornhill was himself a victim, driven to desperation by his family's history of mental illness and exploited by forces he could not understand. Caldwell introduced expert testimony from 3 physicians who testified that Dr. Thornhill showed signs of acute psychological disturbance consistent with the hereditary madness he had been attempting to cure. The defense strategy essentially conceded that Dr. Thornhill's actions were indefensible, but argued they were the product of insanity rather than criminal intent. The trial took an unexpected turn on May 12, 1867. Mrs. Catherine Thornhill, who had been receiving medical care since the events of March, appeared in court to provide testimony. Her appearance shocked the courtroom. According to the Springfield Republican's coverage dated May 13, 1867, Catherine had physically deteriorated dramatically, appearing emaciated and aged beyond her 33 years. She spoke in a barely audible whisper, providing an account of the preceding months that painted a picture of systematic psychological torture. Catherine testified that her husband had become increasingly obsessed with his research throughout 1866, spending entire nights in the cellar laboratory. He had insisted on administering preventive treatments to the children, involving injections of Delphine's treated blood. When Catherine objected, Edmund had responded with threats of committing her to an asylum for hysteria. She had witnessed the progressive changes in Delphine, watching the young woman transform from a healthy, vital person into something Catherine struggled to describe. Most terrifying to Catherine were the nights when she would wake to find Delphine standing beside the children's beds, whispering to them while they slept. When confronted, Delphine would simply smile and say she was teaching them the songs of the deep places. Most dramatically, Catherine testified that on the night of March 7, 1867, the night before the authorities were summoned, she had witnessed the final confrontation between Edmund and Delphine. Unable to sleep, she had descended to the main floor and observed them in the parlor through a partially open door. Delphine had been speaking to Edmund, and Catherine provided the court with a detailed recollection of the conversation, one that would be quoted in newspaper accounts and legal records for years to follow. According to Catherine's testimony, Delphine had said, "You stole my blood, master, believing you could extract what you needed and discard the rest. But blood carries memory. It carries history. And my blood carries the memories of my mother and her mother before her, back through generations of people stolen from their homes and brought to this land in chains. When you forced me into your experiments, when you drained me again and again, you thought you were purifying your cursed bloodline. Instead, you gave me access to yours. I have tasted the Thornhill madness, and it is not disease, master. It is a hunger for knowledge that should not be known, for power that should not be touched. Your ancestors were drawn to these caves for a reason. They sensed what lived in the deep places, and they craved it. That craving is your true inheritance." Catherine testified that Edmund had fallen to his knees, weeping, and asked what Delphine wanted from him. Her response, according to Catherine's account, was chilling in its simplicity. "I want you to see yourself. I want you to understand what you have truly become, and I want your children to carry forward what I have given them, to spread it through generations to come, a gift that is also a curse, payment for a debt centuries in the making." The following morning, Catherine said, Edmund had descended to the cellar and had not emerged until the authorities arrived. She believed he had spent those hours in the caves with Delphine, though she could not say what had occurred in that darkness. On May 18, 1867, the jury returned a verdict of guilty on all charges. Dr. Edmund Thornhill was sentenced to life imprisonment at the Missouri State Penitentiary. However, he never served this sentence. On the night of May 20th, while being held in the Stone County Jail pending transfer to the penitentiary, Dr. Thornhill was found dead in his cell under circumstances that sparked immediate controversy. According to the official report filed by Sheriff Brennan, Dr. Thornhill had taken his own life by opening his veins with a sharpened piece of metal, presumably torn from his cell bed frame. The amount of blood found in the cell was noted as remarkable, filling a significant portion of the floor area. More disturbing were the symbols traced in blood on the cell walls, geometric patterns similar to those found in the Thornhill cellar, but more elaborate and precise. Dr. Thornhill had also used his blood to write a message on the floor beside his body. The message, preserved in multiple photographic records taken at the scene, read, "I saw myself in her eyes before dying, and what I saw was not human. It never was." Dr. Reinhardt, who conducted the post-mortem examination, noted several anomalies in his report dated May 22, 1867. Dr. Thornhill's blood exhibited the same unusual characteristics previously observed in his children's blood samples. Unusual viscosity, darker coloration, and those strange crystalline formations. More significantly, Dr. Reinhardt observed that the wounds on Dr. Thornhill's wrists showed signs of having been inflicted several hours before death, yet the doctor had apparently remained conscious and active during that time, creating his elaborate blood drawings while slowly exsanguating. The rate of blood loss and the volume expelled should have rendered him unconscious within minutes, yet the precision of the symbols suggested he had worked methodically for an extended period. The fate of the Thornhill children became a matter of intense medical interest and ethical debate. They remained in their comatose state for 3 weeks following the events of March 9th. Dr. Reinhardt and a team of consulting physicians maintained constant observation, documenting their condition in unprecedented detail. The children's vital signs remained stable but profoundly abnormal. Their heart rates synchronized perfectly, all three beating at exactly 18 beats per minute. Their body temperatures registered consistently at 94 degrees Fahrenheit. Most remarkably, they required neither food nor water, showing no signs of dehydration or malnutrition despite complete nutritional absence. On March 30th, 1867, the children woke simultaneously at 3:47 in the morning. Nurses attending them reported that all three opened their eyes at exactly the same instant, sat up in their beds with mechanical synchronization, and turned to look at the observers. When questioned about their condition, Margaret, as the eldest, spoke for all three, stating simply, "We have been learning. She taught us while we slept. We know the way down now." The children were placed under the guardianship of Catherine's sister in Philadelphia and transported east within days of their awakening. Medical follow-up reports, preserved in the archives of the Pennsylvania Medical College, document their progress over the subsequent years. Physically, they appeared to recover, though they retained certain unusual characteristics. All three exhibited heightened sensitivity to light, preferring dimly lit environments. Their hearing remained abnormally acute. They required significantly less sleep than typical children, often remaining awake for days at a time without apparent fatigue. Psychologically, the children displayed disturbing commonalities. All three reported recurring dreams of cave systems, of swimming through dark water, of voices that spoke in harmonics rather than words. They developed an unusual closeness, often speaking simultaneously or completing each other's sentences. They showed little interest in typical childhood activities, preferring instead to read advanced texts on geology, mineralogy, and hydrology. By their teenage years, all three had developed expertise in cave systems and underground water networks that exceeded academic specialists in those fields. Perhaps most significantly, all three exhibited an inexplicable ability to locate water sources. They could walk across unfamiliar terrain and identify, with perfect accuracy, the presence of underground streams and aquifers far below the surface. This ability was documented by multiple geologists and surveyors who consulted them on well-digging projects. The children explained this skill by saying they could hear the water moving through stone, that it spoke to them in frequencies others could not perceive. Mrs. Catherine Thornhill died on June 3, 1869, at the age of 35. The official cause of death was recorded as consumption, but Dr. Marcus Howell, who attended her final days in Philadelphia, noted in his private journal that her symptoms did not match any consumption case he had previously encountered. She had wasted away gradually, as though some essential vitality was being slowly drained from her body. In her final delirium, she spoke repeatedly about caves extending beneath the earth, about water that carried memory, and about seeing Delphine's face reflected in her children's eyes. The question of what became of Delphine remained unresolved for decades. No trace of her was ever found in the cave systems beneath the Thornhill estate, despite extensive searches organized by local authorities immediately following the events of March 1867. Sheriff Brennan led multiple expeditions into the natural caverns, mapping several miles of passages and chambers. They discovered evidence that someone had recently occupied some of the deeper chambers, burnt-out candles, discarded clothing, and disturbing marks carved into the limestone walls. But Delphine herself had vanished completely. Sightings of a young black woman matching her description were reported sporadically over the subsequent years. In May 1868, a farmer in neighboring Taney County reported encountering a woman emerging from a cave entrance on his property. She had asked him for water, which he provided, and then disappeared back into the cave before he could question her further. In September 1870, a group of boys exploring caves near Branson claimed they had seen a woman with pale skin and strange eyes watching them from a distant chamber. When they attempted to approach, she had retreated into passages too narrow for them to follow. Most intriguingly, in March 1872, exactly 5 years after the events at the Thornhill estate, a traveling minister named Ezekiel Stone recorded in his journal an encounter at a remote settlement in northern Arkansas. He described meeting a young woman living alone in a cabin near a cave system, supporting herself by treating illnesses and injuries among the local population with knowledge of herbs and minerals. The woman had dark skin that appeared unnaturally pale and eyes that reflected light in an unusual manner. When Reverend Stone attempted to discuss Scripture with her, she had smiled and said, "I have drunk from deeper wells than your God ever imagined, Reverend. I know what sleeps in the bones of the earth, and I know what I carry in my blood." She had allowed him to stay the night, but vanished before dawn. Local residents told him the woman appeared periodically, staying for weeks or months before disappearing again into the cave systems. The Thornhill estate itself remained abandoned for over 2 decades. The property was sold at auction in 1869 to settle Dr. Thornhill's debts, but the new owners, a speculator from Kansas City, never occupied the house. Local residents avoided the property, reporting strange sounds emanating from the cellar and unusual lights visible in the windows at night, despite the house's abandonment. Children in the region developed a tradition of daring each other to approach the estate after dark, though few actually did so, and those who did reported feelings of overwhelming dread and the sensation of being watched from the darkness beneath. In 1889, the property was purchased by Dr. Lawrence Whitmore, a professor of geology from the University of Missouri, who was conducting research into the extensive cave systems of the Ozarks. Dr. Whitmore was aware of the property's history and saw an opportunity to investigate the caves mentioned in the trial records. He established a research station at the estate and conducted systematic exploration of the subterranean passages over a period of 3 years. Dr. Whitmore's research journals, preserved in the University of Missouri archives and examined by this researcher in 1936, provide fascinating documentation of his discoveries. He mapped over 12 miles of interconnected cave passages extending from beneath the Thornhill cellar, discovering multiple chambers and pools of mineral-rich water. He collected water samples and analyzed their chemical composition, finding unusually high concentrations of limestone-derived minerals, trace amounts of various metals, and organic compounds he could not fully identify with the analytical methods available in the 1890s. More significantly, Dr. Whitmore documented finding evidence of prolonged human occupation in some of the deeper chambers. He discovered crude living quarters, including a pallet bed, stored food supplies, and most remarkably, extensive carvings on the chamber walls. These carvings depicted what appeared to be anatomical diagrams mixed with cave system maps, creating images that suggested a connection between human physiology and underground water networks. Dr. Whitmore noted that the style of carving was crude but demonstrated sophisticated understanding of both human anatomy and hydrology. In a journal entry dated October 15, 1891, Dr. Whitmore wrote, "I have made a discovery today that troubles me greatly. In the deepest chamber I have yet reached, approximately 300 feet below the surface, I found a pool of absolutely still water. The pool is roughly circular, perhaps 20 feet in diameter, and appears bottomless despite my attempts to sound its depth. Around this pool, carved into the chamber floor in a spiral pattern, are symbols that match exactly those described in the trial records of Dr. Thornhill. More disturbing still, I found fresh candles arranged around the pool, unburned but recently placed. Someone has been here and may still be here in passages I have not yet explored. I am uncertain whether to continue my investigations or report my findings and withdraw from this place." Dr. Whitmore's journals end abruptly on October 23, 1891. His final entry, written in increasingly erratic handwriting, describes an encounter that defies simple explanation. He reported that while working in the deep chamber with the pool, he had become aware of a presence in the darkness beyond his lamplight. When he raised his lamp to investigate, he had seen a figure standing at the edge of the pool, partially submerged in the water. He described the figure as female, with skin that appeared luminescent in his lamplight and eyes that reflected the flame with an intensity that he found profoundly disturbing. The figure had spoken to him according to his account, though he could not say with certainty whether the words were audible or somehow transmitted directly into his mind. She had said, "The master stole my blood, but I have been drinking from this pool for 24 years. The water here connects to rivers that flow beneath the earth, older than human time, carrying memory and life and purpose. I have become part of that flow. I am the vessel now, and through me the deep things rise toward the surface, drop by drop, generation by generation. You should leave this place, Doctor. Some knowledge is not meant for the light." Dr. Whitmore had fled the caves and returned to the surface. The following morning, when his research assistant arrived at the estate, he found Dr. Whitmore packing his equipment with frantic urgency. The professor abandoned his research immediately, leaving behind most of his collected samples and documentation. He returned to the University of Missouri and resigned his position within weeks, providing no explanation for his actions. He spent his remaining years in St. Louis, refusing to discuss his Ozark research. When colleagues pressed him for information about his sudden departure, he would only say, "Some caves should not be explored, some waters should not be disturbed." The Thornhill children grew to adulthood in Philadelphia, maintaining their unusual characteristics in close psychological bond throughout their lives. Margaret became a noted hydrogeologist, publishing papers on underground water systems that were considered remarkably prescient. She developed theories about water-based transmission of information that were dismissed as eccentric in her lifetime, but have found support in modern research into geological memory and mineral-based information storage. Thomas became a physician specializing in blood diseases, though his career was marked by controversy. He advocated for experimental transfusion techniques that medical boards considered dangerous and unethical. He claimed to have developed treatments involving mineral supplementation of blood that could cure inherited diseases, though his methods were never accepted by mainstream medicine. He was stripped of his medical license in 1903 after allegations that he was conducting unauthorized experiments on patients. Caroline, the youngest, never pursued formal education but became known in certain circles as a spiritual healer with inexplicable abilities. People who consulted her reported that she could diagnose illnesses by touch and prescribe treatments involving specific mineral waters drawn from cave sources. She traveled extensively throughout the eastern United States, always staying near cave systems, and reportedly maintained correspondence with others who shared her unusual abilities, forming a loose network of individuals with similar gifts. All three siblings remained unmarried and childless, apparently by deliberate choice. In a letter written by Margaret to Thomas in 1907, preserved in the private collection of a Philadelphia family and made available to researchers in 1994, she wrote, "We three carry something that should not be passed forward. Delphine gave us a gift and a curse, payment for debts we did not personally incur, but inherited nonetheless. What flows in our veins is not entirely human, brother. We know this. We have always known this. Whatever children we might have would carry this forward, spreading it through generations, and I am uncertain whether that would be miracle or catastrophe. Perhaps both. Perhaps that is precisely what she intended." The Thornhill estate burned to the ground in 1895 under mysterious circumstances. Local residents reported seeing lights in the windows on the night of July 17th, and by dawn, the entire structure was engulfed in flames. No cause was ever determined, though some witnesses claimed to have seen a figure standing in the Manor's Widow's Walk as the fire consumed the building, a dark silhouette against the flames that remained motionless even as the structure collapsed. The fire burned with such intensity that it destroyed not only the house, but also penetrated into the cellar and the cave openings beneath, causing partial collapse of the subterranean chambers. The ruins were never cleared, and over time, vegetation reclaimed the site until only scattered foundation stones remained visible. In 1923, the Missouri Folklore Society conducted a comprehensive investigation of local legends in Stone County, and the Thornhill case featured prominently in their research. Interviews with elderly residents revealed that stories about the Thornhill property had become woven into local tradition. Children were warned not to explore the caves in that area, and tales were told of a pale woman who could be glimpsed in cave entrances during certain phases of the moon, particularly on the anniversary of Dr. Thornhill's death in May and the anniversary of the discovery of the cellar scene in March. Several residents reported that family members who had worked at the Thornhill estate during its operation had passed down strange accounts. One elderly woman, identified in the Folklore Society records only as Mrs. E. Freeman, age 87, claimed her grandfather had been one of the enslaved individuals brought from Virginia by Colonel Thornhill. According to family stories, there had always been something strange about the land the Thornhills had chosen. Local tribes had avoided the area, and early French trappers had reported unusual phenomena in the caves beneath that hollow. Sounds that resembled human voices speaking in unknown languages, lights that appeared in the depths with no apparent source, and waters that seemed to flow upward rather than following normal gravitational patterns. Mrs. Freeman stated that her grandfather had told stories about Delphine's mother, Sarah, who had been known among the enslaved community as someone who could hear the earth speaking. Sarah had warned that the land beneath the Thornhill estate was awake in ways that other land was not, that something ancient existed in those caves, something that predated human presence in the region by eons. When Dr. Edmund Thornhill began his experiments with cave water and blood, Sarah had told the other servants that he was opening a door that should remain closed, inviting something hungry to taste the world above. Perhaps most significantly, Mrs. Freeman claimed that Sarah had told her family that Delphine's participation in Dr. Thornhill's experiments was not entirely involuntary, nor was it entirely Delphine's own choice. According to these accounts, Delphine had begun experiencing vivid dreams months before Dr. Thornhill initiated his research, dreams in which she descended into darkness and encountered something that spoke to her without words. This entity, if it can be called such, had shown her possibilities, had promised her power and knowledge in exchange for serving as a conduit between the deep places and the surface world. When Dr. Thornhill approached her about participating in his experiments, Delphine had agreed not because she felt compelled by her social position, but because she recognized an opportunity to access what had been calling to her from below. In 1934, as part of broader research into unusual medical cases in American history, Dr. Herbert Grayson of Johns Hopkins University traveled to Missouri to investigate the Thornhill case. Dr. Grayson was a specialist in hematology with an interest in historical medical practices. He obtained access to the sealed records from Dr. Reinhardt's original examinations and was able to locate several of the preserved blood samples that had been stored in the Missouri State Medical Association archives. Using modern laboratory techniques not available in the 1860s, Dr. Grayson analyzed these samples and published his findings in the Journal of Historical Medicine in 1936. His analysis revealed genuinely anomalous characteristics. The blood samples exhibited cellular structures that did not match normal human blood composition. He found unusually high concentrations of minerals, particularly calcium, magnesium, and trace elements consistent with limestone formation. More remarkably, he discovered what he described as crystalline inclusions within the red blood cells themselves, geometric formations that appeared to be some form of mineralization occurring at the cellular level. Most puzzling to Dr. Grayson was his observation that the preserved samples, despite being nearly 70 years old, showed no signs of typical decomposition. The blood remained viable, with cellular structures intact, as though the preservation solution used had been far more effective than any method known to medical science in that era. When he attempted to culture the blood samples, he observed unusual growth patterns that he struggled to explain, describing them as exhibiting characteristics somewhere between normal cellular division and crystalline formation. Dr. Grayson attempted to locate descendants of the Thornhill children to conduct comparative studies, but he discovered that all three siblings had died within a 6-month period in 1918, during the influenza pandemic that swept the nation. Margaret died on October 15th, Thomas on November 3rd, and Caroline on December 22nd. All three were in their early 60s, and while influenza was listed as the cause of death in each case, Dr. Grayson found medical records suggesting their deaths followed unusual courses. All three had exhibited the same symptoms: progressive weakness, declining body temperature, and increasing periods of unconsciousness, described by attending physicians as resembling hibernation more than typical illness progression. In their final days, all three reportedly spoke about returning to the caves, about hearing water calling them downward, about seeing Delphine waiting for them in the depths. Dr. Grayson also attempted to investigate the current state of the former Thornhill property. He traveled to Stone County in July 1935 and hired a local guide to take him to the site. The guide, a man named Jacob Potts, was reluctant to approach the area, explaining that local residents maintained their avoidance of that particular hollow. When pressed, Potts revealed that strange occurrences continued to be reported in the vicinity. Hunters claimed their dogs would refuse to enter certain areas near the old foundation. Hikers reported hearing sounds emanating from cave openings in the hillsides, rhythmic patterns that resembled breathing, or perhaps slow heartbeats amplified by cave acoustics. Dr. Grayson documented in his research notes that when they finally reached the site, he experienced profound unease that he attributed to suggestion and local superstition, but found difficult to entirely dismiss. The foundation stones remained visible among the undergrowth, and the collapsed cellar entrance was still apparent, though largely filled with debris. Most significantly, he observed that vegetation grew differently in the immediate vicinity of the old house site. Trees were stunted and twisted, their bark displaying unusual patterns. Ground cover was sparse, and what plants did grow exhibited pale coloration and unusual leaf structures. Dr. Grayson attempted to locate and explore the cave systems mentioned in the historical records. Potts refused to accompany him into any cave entrances in that area, so Dr. Grayson proceeded alone with proper equipment. He mapped several passages, but found that many of the deeper chambers described by Dr. Whitmore had collapsed, likely due to the intense heat of the 1895 fire and subsequent geological instability. He did locate one intact chamber approximately 200 feet below the surface that contained a pool of standing water. In his research notes dated July 18, 1935, Dr. Grayson described this discovery. The pool is roughly circular and appears quite deep, though the water is so still that depth is difficult to assess. The water is remarkably clear and cold, approximately 48 degrees Fahrenheit. I collected samples for analysis. The chamber walls show evidence of carving, geometric patterns that match descriptions from trial records. Most disturbing is the sensation one experiences in this chamber. The acoustics create unusual effects, with even small sounds producing complex echoes that create the impression of voices or music. I remained in the chamber for approximately 30 minutes, and by the time I departed, I was experiencing significant psychological distress, including auditory hallucinations and the persistent sensation of being observed. I do not intend to return to this location. Dr. Grayson's analysis of the water samples revealed high mineral content consistent with limestone cave water, but also anomalous organic compounds he could not identify. He noted that when the water was exposed to human blood samples in laboratory conditions, unusual reactions occurred. The water appeared to partially dissolve the blood cells while simultaneously causing rapid crystallization of mineral content. He observed that this process created formations similar to the crystalline inclusions he had found in the preserved blood samples from 1867. In his published article, Dr. Grayson concluded that Dr. Thornhill's experiments had likely involved systematic blood replacement using mineral-rich cave water, possibly combined with other compounds. He theorized that this process could have produced genuine physiological changes, including altered metabolism, modified blood chemistry, and potentially enhanced certain sensory capabilities. However, he emphasized that such changes would have been extremely dangerous and likely fatal in most cases. The fact that Delphine apparently survived and adapted to these treatments suggested either remarkable physiological resilience or unknown factors not accounted for in the historical record. What Dr. Grayson did not include in his published article, but recorded in his private research notes, were his own disturbing experiences following his investigation. In the weeks after returning from Missouri, he reported experiencing recurring dreams similar to those described in the historical accounts. Dreams of descending through cave passages, of swimming through dark water, of voices speaking in harmonic frequencies. He also noted temporary physical changes including lowered body temperature, reduced pulse rate, and increased sensitivity to light. These symptoms gradually resolved over several months, but Dr. Grayson confided to colleagues that he felt he had been exposed to something during his cave exploration, though whether physical, psychological, or something else entirely, he could not determine. During World War II, the federal government conducted a survey of cave systems throughout the Ozarks as part of potential civil defense planning. Teams of military engineers mapped extensive cave networks, and their survey included the area of the former Thornhill Estate. The military reports, declassified in 1973 and reviewed by researchers at the Missouri State Archives, contained several noteworthy observations. The survey team, led by Captain Robert Chambers, noted that cave passages in that region exhibited unusual characteristics. They documented chambers at significant depths that showed evidence of human modification, including carved symbols and what appeared to be intentional alteration of water flow patterns. They also reported equipment malfunctions in certain areas, with compasses spinning erratically, and electric lights flickering despite fresh batteries. Several team members reported psychological effects including disorientation, auditory hallucinations, and what Captain Chambers described in his report as a persistent sensation of being watched by something just beyond the range of our lights. Most significantly, the survey team discovered a chamber at a depth of approximately 400 feet that contained a pool of water exhibiting highly unusual properties. The water appeared to have abnormal density and surface tension, resisting normal flow patterns. When they attempted to collect samples, several team members reported feeling sudden, severe headaches and nausea. One team member, Corporal James Morrison, reportedly experienced a brief seizure after touching the water. In his medical report, the field medic noted that Morrison's vital signs had dropped dramatically during the episode: body temperature of 93 degrees Fahrenheit, pulse of 20 beats per minute, yet he remained conscious and reported feeling euphoric rather than distressed. Captain Chambers recommended that the area be classified as unsuitable for civil defense purposes due to the psychological effects on personnel and the unstable geological conditions. His report included a note stating, "I am not typically inclined toward superstition, but I must report that every member of my survey team experienced significant psychological distress in this cave system. The local residents' avoidance of this area appears to have rational basis. I recommend against any future military utilization of these caves and suggest they be clearly marked as hazardous." In 1958, a graduate student in anthropology at the University of Arkansas named Ellen Webster conducted research into folk beliefs and oral traditions in the Missouri Ozarks. Her thesis, titled Water Spirits and Cave Legends in Ozark Culture, included extensive documentation of stories related to the Thornhill case. Webster interviewed numerous elderly residents and discovered that the legend had evolved considerably over the 90 years since the events occurred. According to the versions Webster collected, Delphine had become a figure of mythic proportions in local storytelling. She was described as a spirit or guardian of the caves, appearing to those who ventured too deep into the earth, sometimes as a warning and sometimes as a guide. Stories varied regarding her nature. Some portrayed her as a tragic victim who haunted the caves where she died. Others described her as a powerful entity who had transcended human limitations and now existed as something between human and elemental spirit. A few accounts suggested she was not alone, that others had joined her in the deep places, forming a community of transformed beings who existed in the boundary between surface and depth. Webster documented several accounts from individuals who claimed to have encountered Delphine or someone matching her description. A man named Ernest Hale, age 72 at the time of Webster's interview in 1958, reported that in 1925, when he was a young man of 39, he had gotten lost while exploring caves near the former Thornhill property. After hours of wandering in the darkness with his failing lamp, he had encountered a woman who appeared to glow faintly with her own light. She had guided him back to the surface through passages he had not known existed, speaking to him in a voice that seemed to resonate from multiple directions simultaneously. Before she departed, she had touched his forehead and told him, "The caves remember everything, and some of us have become part of that memory. Tell those who come after that the deep places are not empty and they are not sleeping." Another account came from a woman named Dorothy Pierce, who reported that in 1947 her daughter had fallen seriously ill with a blood disease that local doctors could not treat. In desperation, Dorothy had traveled to a remote area near the old Thornhill site based on rumors that a healer lived in those hills. She claimed to have found a woman living in a cabin near a cave entrance, a woman with unusual pale skin and eyes that reflected light strangely. This woman had examined the daughter and provided a treatment involving water drawn from a deep cave pool mixed with specific minerals ground into powder. The daughter had recovered completely. When Dorothy returned to the cabin weeks later to offer thanks and payment, she found the cabin abandoned and no trace that anyone had lived there recently. Webster's thesis concluded that the Thornhill legend had become integrated into broader Ozark folklore about caves, water, and transformation. She argued that the story served psychological and social functions, providing a framework for understanding the mysterious and dangerous aspects of the region's extensive cave systems. However, Webster's private research notes, donated to the University of Arkansas archives after her death in 1992, reveal that she personally believed something genuinely anomalous had occurred at the Thornhill estate, something that existing academic frameworks could not adequately explain. In the 1970s, the growing environmental movement led to increased scientific study of cave ecosystems. Biologists and geologists explored the extensive cave systems beneath the Missouri Ozarks, documenting unique ecosystems and unusual geological formations. Several research teams reported discovering chambers in the region of the former Thornhill estate that exhibited characteristics consistent with prolonged human habitation, though dating the occupation proved difficult. Dr. Sarah Chin, a biologist from the University of Missouri, published a paper in 1976 documenting the discovery of unusual bacterial colonies in water samples collected from deep cave pools in Stone County. These bacteria exhibited characteristics unlike any previously documented species, including the ability to metabolize a wide range of mineral compounds and produce bioluminescent byproducts. Dr. Chen noted that the bacteria appeared to form complex colonial structures that displayed coordinated behaviors, suggesting a level of organization more sophisticated than typical bacterial communities. Most remarkably, Dr. Chen observed that when these bacteria were introduced to human blood samples in laboratory conditions, they appeared to establish symbiotic relationships with blood cells, creating hybrid structures that combine cellular and bacterial characteristics. She theorized that prolonged exposure to water containing these bacteria could potentially produce physiological changes in humans, including altered metabolism and modified blood chemistry. Her paper was largely ignored by the mainstream scientific community, dismissed as speculation based on insufficient evidence. But it attracted attention from researchers interested in extreme environment biology and the possibility of life in unusual conditions. The Thornhill case experienced renewed interest in the late 1990s, with the growth of Internet communities dedicated to unexplained phenomena and historical mysteries. Online forums compiled and analyzed the extensive documentation, creating comprehensive timelines and attempting to solve the central mysteries. Some researchers focused on attempting to locate Delphine's ultimate fate, searching historical records for any trace of her after 1867. Others investigated the cave systems themselves, with several amateur exploration groups venturing into the passages beneath the former Thornhill estate. One such expedition in 2003, led by a group of experienced cavers from Springfield, resulted in the discovery of a chamber that had apparently been sealed by the 1895 fire and subsequent collapse. When they managed to clear the debris and enter, they found a space that showed clear evidence of long-term habitation. The chamber contained the remains of furniture, clothing, and most significantly, dozens of journals written in various hands spanning what appeared to be many decades. These journals, currently held in the private collection of the expedition leader and not yet fully analyzed by academic researchers, allegedly contain accounts from multiple individuals who claim to have undergone transformations similar to those described in the Thornhill case. The journals describe a community of transformed individuals living in the cave systems, sustaining themselves through methods not fully explained but apparently involving the mineral-rich cave waters and unusual dietary practices. Several journals are attributed to Delphine herself, spanning from the 1870s through the 1940s, suggesting she survived far beyond normal human lifespan if the attributions are genuine. The authenticity of these journals remains hotly debated. Skeptics argue they are elaborate modern forgeries created for attention or profit. Supporters point to paper and ink analysis that suggests genuine historical origin and the sophisticated knowledge of historical details displayed in the writings. The journals have not been made fully available for scholarly review, and their ultimate significance remains uncertain. In 2015, a team of geologists from the Missouri Department of Natural Resources conducted a comprehensive survey of groundwater systems in Stone County. Their analysis revealed that the cave systems beneath the former Thornhill estate connect to an extensive underground river network that extends for hundreds of miles throughout the Ozark region. Water isotope analysis suggested that some of this water is extremely old, having been isolated from the surface for thousands of years. The team also documented unusual mineral deposits in certain chambers, including formations that appeared to incorporate organic materials in ways not typically seen in natural cave formations. Most intriguingly, the geological team reported equipment anomalies similar to those documented by the 1940s military survey. Digital recording devices experienced unexplained failures. Compass readings were unreliable in certain areas, and several team members reported psychological effects, including disorientation and auditory hallucinations. In their technical report, the team leader noted that while these effects likely had rational explanations related to unique acoustic properties and equipment interference from mineral deposits, the cumulative impact created an environment that was subjectively disturbing to researchers. To this day, the central questions raised by the Thornhill case remain unanswered. Did Dr. Edmund Thornhill's experiments produce genuine physiological transformation in Delphine and his children, or were the documented changes the result of disease, poisoning, or mass hysteria amplified by cultural tensions and superstition? If transformation occurred, what was its mechanism? Was it purely chemical, the result of mineral compounds and blood manipulation, or did something else operate in those caves? Something that used Dr. Thornhill's experiments as an opportunity to bridge between deep earth and surface world? The fate of Delphine is perhaps the most persistent mystery. If she died in the cave shortly after the events of March 1867, where is her body? If she survived, how and where did she live? The sporadic sightings reported over decades could be dismissed as folklore and misidentification, yet they display remarkable consistency in description and detail. The possibility that someone matching her description was encountered as late as 1947, 80 years after she would have been 19 years old, strains credulity, yet cannot be entirely dismissed given the documentation. The Thornhill children's unusual abilities and their strange deaths in 1918 suggest that something genuinely anomalous affected them during their father's experiments. The medical documentation of their condition, provided by multiple independent physicians over decades, describes physiological characteristics that do not match any known disease process. Their synchronized deaths, afterlives marked by unusual capabilities, raises questions about what they carried in their blood and whether it ultimately consumed them. Perhaps most disturbing is the possibility suggested by some researchers that the Thornhill case represents not an isolated incident, but a single, visible manifestation of something ongoing. The extensive cave systems beneath the Ozarks connect over vast distances, and the water that flows through them moves between regions over geological timescales. If something exists in those deep places, something that can interact with human biology through water and blood, then the events at the Thornhill estate might represent merely one contact point among many, a moment when the barrier between depths and surface became briefly permeable. The former Thornhill property remains largely undisturbed. The Missouri Department of Conservation owns the land as part of a larger preserve, and public access is restricted. The official reason given is unstable geological conditions and dangerous cave openings, but some researchers suspect that ongoing concerns about psychological effects on visitors play a role in maintaining the restrictions. No markers indicate the site's historical significance, and most visitors to the preserve are unaware of its past. Local residents continue to avoid the area. Children growing up in Stone County still hear warnings about certain caves where strange things are said to occur. Hunters report that game animals avoid specific hollows for no apparent reason. Hikers occasionally claim to see lights deep in cave openings where no artificial illumination should exist. These reports are typically dismissed as misperception or imagination, yet they persist with remarkable consistency across generations. In recent years, advances in analytical chemistry and molecular biology have made it theoretically possible to conduct more sophisticated analysis of the preserved blood samples and water specimens collected over the decades of Thornhill investigation. Several researchers have proposed comprehensive studies using modern techniques to finally determine the nature of the physiological changes documented in the historical record. However, such research faces ethical and practical obstacles, and whether it will proceed remains uncertain. What can be stated with confidence is that the documented events at the Thornhill estate in 1867 represent one of the most thoroughly recorded yet least understood cases in the history of American medicine and forensic investigation. Multiple independent witnesses, medical professionals, law enforcement officials, and investigators documented observations that collectively paint a picture of something extraordinary occurring, something that defied the explanatory frameworks available in that era and continues to, resist a simple categorization today. The testimony of those who were present, the medical records that survive, the physical evidence collected, and the decades of subsequent investigation all point toward something genuinely anomalous transpiring in that isolated Missouri hollow. Whether that something was purely physical, the result of chemical compounds and experimental procedures gone wrong, or whether it involved forces and phenomena that existing science cannot adequately address, remains an open question. The words attributed to Delphine during that final confrontation in the cellar continue to echo through the historical record. Master stole my blood, but I have been drinking from the deep places. The image of Dr. Thornhill's final message, written in his own blood on the cell floor, remains equally haunting. I saw myself in her eyes before dying, and what I saw was not human. It never was. These statements suggest a recognition, a moment of terrible clarity, in which the doctor finally understood what he had truly done, what he had awakened, or released, or become. The caves beneath the Missouri Ozarks remain, extended into darkness that has persisted for millions of years. The water continues to flow through those passages, carrying dissolved minerals and perhaps carrying memory as well, if such a thing is possible. The bacterial colonies documented by Dr. Chen continue to thrive in those deep pools, organized in their complex patterns, luminescent in the eternal night of the deepest chambers. And somewhere in that vast underground network, in chambers sealed by time and stone, or perhaps still accessible to those who know the hidden passages, the legacy of what occurred at the Thornhill estate persists. Whether that legacy is purely historical, preserved in documents and folklore, or whether it continues in some more tangible form, remains among the most compelling questions raised by this case. Researchers continue to debate, theories continue to evolve, and the mysteries endure. The Thornhill case stands as a reminder that the boundary between the known and unknown remains permeable, that beneath the surface of documented history run currents we have barely begun to map, and that some questions once raised resist definitive answers for generations. In the darkness beneath the earth, in the cold water that flows through stone, in the memory carried in blood and bone, and the stories we tell, the truth of what happened at the Thornhill estate in 1867 persists, waiting perhaps for understanding, or perhaps for nothing at all, simply existing in the deep places where human comprehension reaches its limit and something else begins.